to talk about today. We're going to be delving into some tools that can help you do your job possibly a little bit easier here and there. A couple of tools that might help you model some more complex details, things you might be struggling with. We are going to be delving into the infamous Booleans operations. And yes, Booleans. It's kind of a mixed bag. They can help you in some instances to create some very complicated shapes, but in most instances what they create is catastrophically bad geometry and horrid edge flow and nightmares for both Maya and whatever port rendering engine you're using. So what we're going to delve into today is first we're going to talk a bit about edge flow, because it's always important to talk about that. Edge flow and quality shapes of the faces for your geometry before we delve into highly destructive means of modeling, which is what Booleans are. Many people, not many, I would say some people utilize Booleans, but very few of them use them properly. So what we're going to talk about today is the proper way to use Booleans and to avoid issues as much as possible. After this phone call. That's okay. So again, the importance of using them properly, because they are probably one of the least well-used tools that we have in Maya. So we're going to try to get you straight on that in terms of the best practices for using that tool, because in some instances it is definitely a help. But from my own personal experience, it's a tool that I absolutely will not use if there's any way for me to do it any other way. It is a last ditch resort for something. So just so you know where I'm coming from with regard to it. In fact, when we talked about teaching the material, it was discussed whether or not we should even teach you guys how to use this. But the problem is there are a lot of tutorials floating around that talk about using them, but they don't really teach you the best practices. So I thought it was better if we show you the best way to use it if you're going to use it, just so that you do a better job with it. So that's what we'll be delving into today. And of course, we also have a big turn-in due tonight, so make sure you get all that stuff turned in. Use your self-grade. If we have time, I'll talk a little bit about that at the end as well. But let's get into talking about edge flow. All right, now, in terms of the shapes of the faces and how it affects edge flow, I think oftentimes there's a bit of a misconception that since we're going for four-sided faces wherever we can and keeping the triangles to a minimum, that means you can't build the things you want to. I can't build organic things, or I can't build highly detailed things. And the truth of the matter is that doesn't make any difference. You can still model anything you want to. It's just an added level of challenge. So what we're going to try to do is talk a bit about the shapes of the faces and talk about the ideals, the somewhat less than ideals, and then the naughty, the things we're trying to avoid, because some of these things are just not sound modeling, not good quality edge flow and geometry. Now, all of these shapes are perfectly acceptable as four-sided. It doesn't have to be a perfect square. The odds of that are astronomically against. But any and all of these count as four-sided entities. So when you're modeling, any of these are perfectly acceptable. Now, these shapes look like triangles, but they are in fact four-sided, because this vertice here makes this two edges, not one. So in the instance where you have this shape, that is a four-sided face. However, it is important to note that you can't just take a triangular face and put a vertice in place and that suddenly quads everything. So just to help you visualize that, let me draw you a quick picture. If I have a, oh no, my dry erase marker is gone. Let's see if there's one over here. Nope, I don't see one. Do you have a dry erase marker, Brian? Because mine appears to be missing. No? Okay. All right, well, I guess. No, that's all right. Typically, I have one. I must have been playing with it, and I lost it somewhere. That's okay. That's all right. Yeah, no worries. All right. Well, again, the big issue here is you want to make sure that when you have a what appears to be a three-sided face, you can't just put a vertice there and then satisfy it as then a four-sided face. There has to be an actual edge connected to it as well. So just bear in mind when you're modeling, triangles aren't necessarily bad as long as you've got two of them, because you can literally take one triangle and connect it to another, and then that would turn them both into four-sided faces. So triangles, again, not necessarily a bad thing. It just depends on how you connect them to each other utilizing the edge flow. Now here's where we get into some shapes that are definitely no good. We want to stay away from interior vertices. And what that means is if you look, yeah, this has got four sides, but one of the vertices is pushed into the interior of the shape of the face. So we want to avoid that. That's not helpful at all. And you can see this is very, very erratic or very irregular in terms of that shape as well. And of course, we know the importance of avoiding non-planar faces, and that's faces that have like a bend in them. So we've got a change in shape, but it's not actually supported by an edge. It's just sort of bent. So that's problematic for your geometry as well. And again, looking at this scene, you might think, oh, well, I can't build that scene using all four-sided faces. But the truth of the matter is you can build anything, any level of complexity, and still maintain four-sided faces wherever you need them. And triangles that look, or four-sided faces that look like triangles in other places. So they're all helpful in terms of building the object that you're trying to build. And in terms of the edge flow, again, I often compare the edge flow of your geometry to like the girders of a building. They give the support and the structure of the building, and good sound support and structure of a building means it's going to be a strong building. And your geometry is kind of the same way, but it's not strength physically, it's strength mathematically. So good quality edge flow is essential to your models. Now, we do use these modeling terminology quite a bit, edge flow and edge loops and things like that. So I just wanted to clarify for you guys in terms of the terms, what they mean, so that you can speak intelligently about your work, because that's something you're going to have to do. People will, in an interview situation, ask you, why did you build your model the way that you did? You know, what was your strategy behind your edge looping and so forth? And you can actually talk about your model in an intelligent way, and that's very important. So in terms of an edge loop, you hear this term a lot. What we're talking about is an edge that actually goes through your entire model and it reconnects back to itself. So it's just sort of a continuous loop, like edge loop would imply, and it's just sort of a continuous flow through the model, and it connects back up onto itself. So that's an edge loop specifically. Edge flow is the idea that your edges move through your model in a specific direction. Again, it gives you the support and the structure of the object, and you can just sort of see the way the edges are flowing or moving across the surface of your geometry. Does that make sense, the difference between the two? Okay. All right. So now, it is by no mistake that we are talking about edge flow and the importance of good quality geometry before we talk about Booleans, because Booleans are a bit disastrous in terms of what they do to your geometry while you are modeling. So what I, again, hope to do is to explain to you in such a way that the Booleans make more sense to you and show you a smart way to use them. Because there, as I said, there are quite a few people who use them, but not necessarily best practices, and they end up with not such great geometry. And I'm trying to avoid that happening to any of you guys. So again, use them smart. In terms of the Booleans, they, as I've said before, they can create really bad geometry. So you have to be careful when you're using them. Pay close attention to what's going on. And bear in mind that sometimes the order in which you select your geometry affects the behavior of the Boolean. So definitely make sure you are paying attention to that. And I will point that out wherever that's relevant for you. All right, so let's take a look at the Booleans. In terms of where they live, if you go to your main menu item, Mesh, you will notice that you can go right to Booleans, and there's a little drop-down menu. And the three major Booleans operations are the union, the difference, and the intersection. And again, it's three different varieties of the same thing. And what I'd like you to think of Booleans as is I'm kind of using one piece of geometry to affect another piece of geometry. So I'm just using them as tools on each other. I guess much like you might bang two rocks together or something like that, use one rock to shape the other, that kind of idea. So they kind of work together to make a new shape. And that's some interesting stuff sometimes, but you got to be careful. All right, so let's take a look at the first one. The first one is the union operation. And the union operation is basically taking two pieces of geometry and fusing them together. And fusing is absolutely the term, because you're basically taking two objects and making them one in Maya's mind. It creates a whole new thing. So all of your, all those weird movies you've ever seen where they take like a rhinoceros and a jellyfish and turn that into one monster, or I don't know, maybe you guys are watching different shows than me, but anytime you're combining two things that really don't make any sense, that's kind of what's going on with Booleans. And in terms of the union operation, just to give you an idea of how it works, what I did was I took my Lego me and I created a sphere, and I took that sphere and I just stuck it into my chest, and then select both pieces and run mesh Booleans union. And what it does is it literally takes the sphere and my chest and it fuses them together into a single object. Melds them together, and what happens is basically the amount of, or the aspect of the geometry that you can't see instantly is disintegrated. So the part of my chest that is covered by the sphere, that's all gone. There's just a big opening there. And the part of the sphere that's inside my chest, also totally gone. It literally just fuses those surfaces together, and it only keeps the outside of the geometry. Now, in terms of the edge flow, you can see, are there the same number of edges on this sphere as on my chest? Not even close. So obviously, Maya could care less about edge flow, good quality faces, good structure, render times, tool functionality. Maya doesn't care about any of that. So it will do it, I think, just to spite you sometimes. So it's obviously, the end result is not geometrically sound, but the good news is we can fix it. But you can see if I was trying to create that smooth curved surface on the front of my chest like that, that would probably be the fastest way to do it and make sure that it was very even looking, as opposed to me kind of trying to extrude that sort of shape. Now the other side of the union is the intersection operation. And intersection is very much the opposite of union. So what happens is I've got the same thing going on here. I took a sphere and I stuck it into the chest of my character, and I ran mesh Booleans intersection. And what it did was the part of the sphere that was covering my chest is gone. And what it kept was what was underneath. And the part of my chest that was covering the sphere, that's gone. And it kept what was underneath. So union is sort of the complete opposite of union. It does the opposite. It preserves the inside of whatever it is you've fused together, and it totally eliminates the outside of everything. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, it's just sort of erasing the outside, and it keeps whatever is on the inside. Now, the third operation we're going to talk about today is the difference operation. And the difference operation is, the way I like to describe it is I'm using one piece of geometry to take a bite out of another piece. So I've got one piece of geometry and I want to use that to take a bite out of the other piece. And so again, if I take a sphere and I stick it into my character's chest and I run the difference operation, the sphere basically eats everything inside of it like a black hole. It just devours everything in that shape, and it leaves behind whatever else is left, whatever was outside of that sphere, Gesundheit. And it basically, and what's interesting is it does sort of fuse the objects together to a certain degree, because you can see on the interior of my chest, that's the part of the sphere that was inside my chest. So it does preserve some of the geometry of the biting object, because ultimately, whatever it is we build is hollow inside. So Maya wants to sort of fuse that and make sure it's, you know, airtight to a certain degree with that surface. Now, of course, you know we're going to play with this stuff because it's just too crazy to talk about it and not play with it. So we're going to do a little bit of playing with the Booleans operations, and you'll get to see them firsthand how they work. So first, let's go to Maya, and we're going to set our project, because we always have to make sure we know and let Maya know what it is we're working on. So I go to File, Set Project, and I choose my activity file folder, Set. And now I'm going to go to File, Open Scene, and I want my Booleans activity. So make sure you select that. Open your Booleans. All right. And what you see is I've got 3 pieces of geometry, and they're identical. Basically, what I did was took a cylinder and stuck it, you know, 2/3 of the way into a cube. So they're all exactly the same. And I made them different colors. Well, because different colors are fun, but then you can also kind of see what's happening between the 2 pieces of geometry. And so here we go. Let's have some fun. First pieces of geometry, I'm going to select the first piece of geometry, hold Shift, and add this second piece of geometry. So they're both selected. I could do a marquee selection also. Mesh, Booleans, Union. And let me show you what happened. I'm going to go to my orthographic view so you can see before, after, before, after, before, after. So with the Booleans union operation, it basically fused the cylinder with this cube. And if you go inside, you can see, well, you can see, you know, right here, Maya's kind of trying to attach these things together. But you know, that's not even close to being a good quality edge flow, but there are a couple of edges on there. And if you go inside, you can see that the part of the square that was inside the cylinder is totally gone. And I can see up into the cylinder now. And the part of the cylinder that was inside the square is totally gone. Again, whatever's on the interior completely disappears, and whatever's on the exterior fuses together. All right, everybody got those 2? Awesome. All right, let's do the next one. So I'm going to grab these 2. Again, grab the cylinder, then grab the cube or marquee, it doesn't matter. Mesh, Booleans, intersection. Now the intersection, if you recall, is the opposite of the union. So in this instance here, what disappeared was the part of the cube that was the top of the cylinder and the part of the cylinder that was outside of the cube. So just so you can see that one on instant replay, you can see it basically maintained the inside of the cylinder, what was inside the cube, and it kept just a little bit of the cube to sort of seal the top of the cylinder. So for all that work, I've got a cylinder. But that is the intersection operation doing its thing. Now the third one, this is where we're going to get into the difference, and this is where it actually matters which one you choose first. So for example, if I grab this cylinder first and then I grab the cube and I do mesh Booleans difference, what happens is the cube takes a bite out of the cylinder. So the cube goes away, and the little bit of the cube that was inside the cylinder we keep. And again, just so you can see it here, it basically, the cube is taking a bite out of the cylinder. All right, now, let's say this time I grab the cube first and then the cylinder. And I go mesh Booleans difference. Now, the cylinder takes a bite out of the cube. So if you had to make a pool cue in 2 seconds flat, that would work. But as you can see, obviously these are both huge n-gons, and we've got some crazy looking edge flow on there and geometry that is just a mathematical nightmare, but it does give you the shape pretty quickly and, you know, fairly smoothly. Does that make sense? Get a hell yeah from everybody on that? Yeah, go ahead. If I took the face on the opposite side, what do you mean if I put it all the way through?
Yeah, if you were to go to face mode, select the bottom of the cube, and then hit poke, put it match up.
Does that make sense? It just literally one thing, it's almost as if it instantly disintegrates, and just whatever is within it, it also disintegrates. Well, we're going to talk about that. That's a good question. We're going to talk about that. How is the best way to use these things? And as far as Booleans go, I encourage you guys to play with them. You know, as far as let's pretend I'm teaching you guys to swim. You know, I'm showing you some of the strokes on land, and I'm bringing you into the water just so that you can see. But we're only going about knee deep at best with what we're doing. So everything that I show you guys, by all means, please explore and play with to greater degree. This is in no way the end result of information you could possibly have on the Booleans, but I like to show this stuff to you to try to perk your interest and get you to look at this stuff, because it is so deep. And I say this with full confidence. I've been using for Maya for about, I think, 15 years now, and I still learn new stuff every time I use this application. So there's no, I've figured it out. That doesn't happen. I know how to get Maya to do what I would like Maya to do the overwhelming majority of the time, but that doesn't mean it always works. So I definitely encourage you guys to play and explore when you're working on this stuff. So anything you learn through your own little struggles, you're going to have that information for life. So I encourage it. All right, so let's grab these guys and get them out of there. And you will have to delete them, but I've got another layer of fun. I know you're going to like it. So just hit the visibility on that. And here's where we're going to talk about the smarter way to use Booleans. Now, when you look at this piece of geometry, you can see that every edge on one shape connects to another edge on the other shape. And that's what we mean by nice edge flow, fully quadded. You know, all these faces have 4 sides. You know, a cylinder coming out of a cube or a cube coming out of a cylinder is probably one of the trickier things you'll ever have to do. But yet, it seems to be working just fine. So again, if this is the goal or what we're hoping for, let's take a look at using the Booleans to accomplish the same thing. So let's assume we just want to take these 2 shapes, run the Booleans on it, and then we have to fix it afterwards, because obviously the edge flow we get is going to be of poor quality. So if we go to Mesh Booleans Union, again, just like we did before, it fuses the 2 pieces of geometry together, but I end up with some horrible n-gons on the top here that are going to have to be fixed. All right, you guys have any suggestions or thoughts? What do you think we're going to have to do here? Multi-cut tool is definitely going to be our buddy.
Well, can we undo this, change the subdivision from the cylinder route back to 7 or 8 or 10, and then try to do it?
Oh, let's talk about both of those approaches. So here's the first approach. Fix it after the fact, because that's one thing you can do. When it doesn't turn out with great edge flow, and it won't, fix it after the fact. So what I can do is go in here and get my insert edge loop tool, right? Drop a couple of edge loops in here. Try to get them to line up, you know, more or less with this piece of geometry. And then I'm going to have to grab some of these other edges and get rid of them, right? And interestingly enough, I've got this really crazy geometry going here. that I'm going to have to get rid of because that doesn't line up all that well. Let's scoot that over a little bit, and then I'm going to end up having to merge the vertices here. Does that make sense, to try to clean that up? And what I'd end up having to do is get all this stuff to line back up and merge it all together and try to clean it up after the fact. And you'll notice that sometimes you get some really crazy results when you do this. Is anybody getting any crazy shading on their geometry? Some crazy, like before I deleted that edge, like that kind of stuff going on? Is anybody seeing any of that? Because usually you get some pretty nutty stuff showing up once you start working with Booleans. And sometimes the geometry in general, you just end up having to delete it and then try to fix it in some way using some of the other tools to try to fill it in. Where is... Oh, there it is. I thought it was under mesh. Put some new geometry in there, and then you're going to have to get in there with another tool like the multi-cut tool and cut here, and then try to get it to go across if it'll do it, because it might not. No, it doesn't want to do it. It's like, no, you can't make me. So it doesn't even want to cut it. But the point is, you can try to go back and fix it as an option, and you can come up with quadratic geometry. It is possible to make it look good. Well, to make it four-sided anyway, fix it up. But the issue you typically run into is the edges aren't very evenly spaced, and it starts to look a bit like a duct tape and bubblegum assembly, if you know what I mean. Very rough and not so nice looking in terms of the behavior, the geometry, but it can be done. But again, you end up having to sort of recut all of the edge flow and then put in better edge flow for a more positive result. Didn't like that at all. But you can see sometimes you can do it and sometimes you can't. It doesn't want me to do it right there at all. But that's one option, fixing it later. Now, the other option, which I like much better, is fixing it before you do the operation. And this is by far the better way to do it because you get less of this kind of weird stuff going on. And one of you guys was asking me about that specifically. What if we did something beforehand? And so here's what I'm going to do. I've got these two shapes that I want to bring together. And anytime I'm using the Booleans operations or these types of things, I like to be able to see my edges in advance. It's just so much easier to do the work. So something that I will use is if you go to your shading menu set and you put wireframe on shaded, and what that does is it basically shows your model not only shaded and solid, but you can actually see the edges as well. So I can kind of see where the problems are. Like I need an edge right here to connect these. I need an edge right here to connect those because this is obviously an n-gon where these are coming together. So I'm gonna have to fix that. So what I can do is take this piece and I'm just literally going to move it out of the way at first. And I'm gonna get my multi-cut tool out and I'm going to use it on this piece of geometry right here. And I'm just gonna cut and go to the middle and cut. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here, cut, go to the middle, cut, and go to the corner. And then now, when I take this piece of geometry and I move it back to where it's supposed to be by plugging in all zeros because I froze the transformations on my geometry. Now that they're lined back up again, and I can see that every edge on this object is going to connect to an edge on that object, well, now I can grab these two and do my mesh Booleans union, and it does a perfect attachment of the two, and it looks much more neat, clean, and professional in terms of the edge flow and the shapes of the faces. So again, your two options are do the Booleans operation and fix it after, but sometimes you start getting some crazy results, or prep the geometry in advance and then run the operation, which I much prefer of the two if I'm going to use it at all. So it's a little bit better way, in my opinion, to create that. Now, let's say, for example, you're trying to make, I don't know, the antenna of a ladybug, for example. You might be thinking, wow, it's actually, if I could just stick a sphere and a cylinder together, that would be great, right? And some of you actually try to do that without using Booleans. Just kind of stuck them together, but we can select the two and do our mesh Booleans union and fuse those two together, and you can see that actually does a pretty good job of putting those two shapes together. But it is of the utmost importance that when you do that, you line up the edges, because your edges can be off a little bit, and you grab those two pieces, mesh Booleans union, and Maya will fuse them even though the edges don't line up right. So you really have to be careful that you are lining these things up well. And if I am attaching a 20-sided cylinder to a sphere, how many sides do you think my sphere needs? 20. It's got to be the same. So when you're trying to fuse these things together, you got to have the same number of sides on both entities. So it's of the utmost importance that they line up properly, and you have the same number of edges for whatever operation you're running in terms of the Booleans. But here's something I'd like to put out there. Yes, it is very, very difficult to take a cylinder and extrude a sphere from it, because spheres are, you know, pretty much what we consider perfect in terms of their shape. So the question is, maybe I'm going about it wrong. Maybe I don't extrude a sphere out of a cylinder. Maybe I extrude a cylinder out of a sphere, because that's the smarter way to approach it. Because I can get this shape very easily if I grab, just grab the faces on the end. Here, I'll grab them over here so you can see. I'm just going to grab the faces on the end of this object, right? I've just got those guys on the end. And then I do edit mesh extrude. And the extrude tool as it stands right now in terms of the way it extrudes, if I just pull it straight out, you say, you know, that's cool looking and all, but that's not really what we got going on this side. And it's exactly, if it's badminton, you're golden. Outside of that though, or rocket cone, you know, something like that. But the thing is the extrude tool works based on the normals on the surface of the geometry. So since that surface is curved, it's sort of trying to accommodate for that. So when you do that extrusion, it's going to flare out like that. But if you click on this icon, which I actually have shown you guys before, this is the indicator that switches between object space and world space. You can click on this icon here and then do the extrusion, and now it's working on true world axes and not necessarily utilizing the normals. So now I can pull this straight out like this and get exactly a cylindrical shape out of this object, and I can even utilize my scale tool to flatten it out, and now I've got exactly the same thing as I had on the other side. So it's, you know, again, sometimes what the Booleans tools do seems like magic, and you're thinking, wow, it can solve any problem, when in actuality, just by thinking of the problem a different way, I came up with a better solution. So sometimes it's a gift and sometimes it's a nightmare, but Booleans can sometimes help you out. So just what I would say is, if there are no alternatives, you know, of course, try the Booleans and see if that'll give you what you need. But maybe you just need to think of the problem a little differently, and that could be the difference that you're missing. Yes, go ahead. Well, it will work on any tool that options between world and object space. Now, any tool that you utilize, there are different axis adjustments that you can make. You know, is it world? Are we dealing with the object? Am I dealing with a specific component? Am I dealing with the normals? So some tools will function based off of different orientations. Does that make sense? But not every tool. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe this will work now. So, like I said, it's not every tool can you adjust its function like that, but many tools there are. So, you know, by all means, that's why we have those options boxes. Look at them, see what they have for options. Sometimes there's a neat little setting in there that makes a difference in terms of the functionality of that tool. But were you guys able to connect these two shapes nicely like this, and also able to extrude a nice cylinder out of a sphere? I just want to make sure you guys are both capable of doing both of those things before we move on to the next exciting thing we want to talk about. You guys, you got that? Do I need to come around? Okay, I'll walk around. I'll take a quick look and see how you guys are doing. Again, the two things I want to see that you can do is extrude a nice cylinder out of the sphere, utilizing that orientation where you can switch it from world to object and from object to world space. And then connect those two pieces of geometry together nicely, because that's going to make a big difference for some of the things that you have to build. All right. How are my digital friends doing? You guys are all right? Good, good. I'm glad. Yeah, they're not too crazy, but there's definitely some stuff to be learned about those Booleans. All right. All right. So the next two tools we're going to be talking about are the combine tool and the separate tool. And it's no coincidence we're talking about these tools today, because this is another set of tools that people typically don't use right. It's a shortcut, but it's a bad one. And typically, people try to utilize the combine tool as an effort to get things to move together, which it kind of does, but again, that's not really what that thing is for. So what we're going to talk about today is really the way you're going to be using the combine tool and what it was designed for in terms of its best use. So for this one, again, we've got another fun little exercise for us to do. And if you go to File, Open Scene, and get your Combine and Separate activity, because this has got, again, some fun stuff here. I'm going to actually, if you just click the visibility and hide that piece there, I actually want to get to the other layer, and we're going to talk about how to use the combine tool in terms of the way it was designed. And basically, the combine tool is utilized when I'm trying to attach two separate pieces of geometry to each other. And I know in the beginning, when you guys were first modeling, quite a few of you were trying to figure out, how do I just stick these two shapes together? Because I don't want to learn how to use the extrude tool. It's too hard. And I totally understand that desire, because that seems like a shortcut. And then that's why I purposely did not show you guys this any sooner, because I don't want you doing this, because in the most instances, this is not the correct solution for what you're thinking. But let's say I've got two pieces of an object that I've modeled and I want to attach them to each other. Okay, then this is really how I would use this tool. Now, first things first, you cannot attach two separate pieces of geometry to each other. Maya thinks of these as two separate entities, so you can't attach them to each other. If you try to use the merge tool and stuff like that, it won't function properly. So what you have to do first is actually combine them so that Maya thinks of them as the same object. So you just have to select both objects and go to Mesh and choose Combine. And literally, excuse me, I'm sorry. It literally combines the two objects, so now that they're one. And what's interesting is they're not even attached to each other, but if I select one, they both light up. So Maya thinks of this as a single entity at this point. So in terms of trying to attach these two pieces of geometry, if I were to bring these two faces together where they are right now, what would end up happening is I would have two faces on the inside of this object that are like right on top of each other, right? And we talked about that's a problem on a couple of different levels. You know, number one, we're talking about non-manifold geometry because we've got three faces sharing the same edge. But we also have, what other issue do you guys see there? What do we call it with two faces on top of each other?
When there's a face inside the mesh, when the mesh is supposed to be hollow.
Absolutely, the mesh is supposed to be hollow, so I've got interior faces that I don't need. And I've got two faces on top of each other, which if you recall from our cleanup exercise is called lamina faces. So there's a number of different issues here, and that's why I can't just attach those two things together. So what we have to do first is literally make it so that it will be hollow. So what I'm going to do is select this face and delete it, and then go to this face and select it and delete it. So now when I do bring these two things together, it will be a hollow shape. Does that make sense? Okay. So now the next thing we need to do is, if we're going to bring these faces together, what we have to do is basically attach the vertices of one object to the vertices of the other object. And just like the Boolean's operations, we need to have the same number of edges on both objects or they're not going to attach properly. So, you know, this has got 4 edges on it, this has got 4 edges on it. Okay, then I can connect these to each other. Now, it's true, I could grab these vertices and kind of get them real close and then try to attach them to each other. But Maya has a really cool function called point snap. And it's a great way to snap things together. But when I say snap, it doesn't actually connect them to each other. They're still separate pieces, but I can get them to occupy the same space. So if you look at your keyboard and you see the V key as in Victor, V is snap to point. And what that will allow me to do is literally grab a vertice, which is a point, hold down my left mouse button, and I can drag it, and you can see it wants to snap to other vertices. And as long as I hold that left mouse button, I can just drag that thing around and it will snap to whatever vertices I bring it near, almost like it's a magnet. So I can literally snap it right to the corner of that blue cube. And I can grab another one, hold V, snap it up there, grab another one, hold V and snap it down there. And then grab another one, hold the V and snap it on that other corner. So I've got one on each corner. Very important to realize though, again, these are not connected to each other. I can still move them as a separate piece. That's not how those would move if they were attached. They are combined. Maya still thinks of them as a single object, but I still need to do one more thing to actually make them a whole solid object, and that is merge the vertices. So what I'm going to do is, again, go to vertex mode and do a marquee selection, so I make sure I get both of the vertices, the one from the blue cube and the one from the green cube, and then I'm going to go to edit mesh and merge it. And again, I can grab the other ones and do the same there. And merging is a repeatable action, so that's something I can press G and do it again and again. And then once you've got them all merged, you can just grab that vertice, and then using your move tool, if you pull on it and both pieces move, okay, then that's been attached. That's a good attachment. If you grab a vertice and move it and it comes apart, then you didn't merge those. So check your threshold, because maybe that's not enough. Yes?
And then after that, you still have to remove the extra faces inside, right?
I deleted those first. But you can merge them and delete them after the fact, or delete them first and then merge them. Either one is fine. Just so I don't forget, I do it first. But that's me. You know, everybody's got their own voodoo, you know, their own little things that they do. I try to keep myself out of trouble. I try not to remember too much. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's really how you're supposed to use the combine tool, and that's really how you're supposed to attach things to each other. So that's really what it's best designed for. Now, there's some other tools that are really handy that do kind of the same thing, and they work off of a similar principle, and that's why I've grouped them all together here for you guys. The next tool we're going to talk about is another really fun one for doing some cool stuff. It's called the bridge tool. And the bridge tool, much as its name implies, it sort of creates geometry and connects two things together. It works off of the same idea that you have to combine the geometry first in order to get it to work, but it will bridge that gap for you, literally and figuratively, between two pieces of geometry. But it's pretty fun. So I want to show you guys how to use that one, because that's another good one. So we don't need this one anymore. Again, any file you feel like, wow, I'd like to do that again, don't save it. You know, just let it go back to the way it was when you first got the file, or download it again, and you can run these lessons over and over again. So I'm going to go to File, Open Scene, and this time I want my bridge tool. So grab your bridge activity and open that guy. All right, and I've got some really fun shapes to play with. Again, in terms of running the bridge tool, I got to combine my geometry first. No worky if you know combine-y. So I'm going to grab the two pieces of geometry. I'm going to go to Mesh and choose Combine. All right, so that when I select one, they both light up. Now, added bonus of the bridge tool is you don't have to delete the faces on the inside. It will actually do that for you. So I'm going to grab this face, and I'm going to grab this face. And I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, and you will see the bridge tool. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure it's doing what I want first. Okay. So I run the bridge tool, and you'll see what it does is it literally creates a bridge or connects those two pieces of geometry to each other. And again, this is another one of those ones that has a really fun dialog box where you can interact with it after you've made it. And in terms of one of the things we can make an adjustment to, put your cursor over the word divisions and hold down your left mouse button, and you can change, whoops, wrong one. And you can change the number of divisions in your geometry here. Oh, does it not do it with the curve? No, it should do it. What have I got going? Oh, my taper was interfering with it. There we go. So the divisions increases the number of divisions, literally the number of edges between the two pieces. And where that comes into play is a couple of different instances. One of them being the taper, which I was just playing with. It was accidentally, I set it to 0. But the taper allows you to adjust sort of the width of the bridge that appears between the geometry. So you can kind of like make it breathe. So you can make some interesting shapes there. And obviously, the more divisions you have, the more smooth the taper will appear. Fewer divisions will lead to a more blocky taper, but you can still do it. And then there's a really fun twist channel too, where you can kind of put a little bit of a little swang on it there and make it look a little bit funky. I got to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever used the twist, but the taper I've used on occasion. But the twist is kind of fun, and Chubby Checker likes it, so we'll do it. All right, so that's the bridge tool connecting those two things. Now you might be thinking, okay, well the bridge tool connects things that are the same size. Does it connect things that are different sizes? Oh, absolutely. You can go from a larger object to a smaller object and still run that bridge tool, and it will connect them to each other. And they don't have to be perfectly lined up either. You can see this one's higher than the other one. And you still have the ability to add divisions to it and play with the taper to get some interesting shapes there. Create sort of a handle or something like that for an object, or a spout possibly. But by far, I think one of the coolest things that the bridge tool does, I'm going to do with these next two objects. I'm going to grab these two cylinders and I'm going to combine them, because again, that's the key thing. If you don't combine it, it won't do its thing properly. Go to face mode. I'm going to grab all the faces on the front of this object. Right, and I'm going to grab all the faces on the front of this object too. All right, and I'm going to run my bridge tool, and I want you to keep note of this thing. Do you see this thing right here? This is a NURBS curve. We're going to talk about that in a second, what it can do. But what's really cool is you notice it's going directly from one to the other because my divisions are very low. If I put more divisions on it, I'll get more of that curvature that I'm looking for in terms of its behavior. So if there's not enough divisions, it's going to look very angular. But with more divisions, I get that nice smooth curvature. But here's the really cool thing that it can do that I want to show you guys. Now, if you noticed when I did my bridge tool, you'll note that my settings are smooth path plus curve. And that's important because what I asked it to do is connect these two pieces of geometry together, but also to create another piece of geometry called a NURBS curve. And the NURBS curve is, again, it's another piece of geometry, like this is polygons, you know, like build something out of metal, build something out of wood, build something out of plastic. NURBS are another piece of geometry. But what's interesting about NURBS is one of the shapes or one of the forms that NURBS takes is called a NURBS curve. And a NURBS curve is basically like if you could take a marker and draw a line on a piece of paper and then be able to pick it up and then change its shape. So it's a line with physicality to it, which is kind of cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my show menu and I'm going to uncheck polygons so you can just see the curve, because it's not a polygon object, it's a NURBS object. So I'm going to uncheck polygons so you can just see the curve. And what's cool about this curve is, yeah, it's a line, but it's got these components that I can grab and manipulate, just like vertices and edges and faces. So what you have to do is hold your right mouse button over the geometry. And again, you can see it's physical right here, right? That's something I could grab and move. So what I'm going to do is hold down the right mouse button and choose Control Vertex, because that's kind of the same thing as a vertice, just for a NURBS object. And I can grab these little points here and I can literally move them. And when I move the control vertex, you'll notice that it kind of changes the shape of the curve. Well, here's the cool thing that happened when we created this thing. We actually made a bond or a relationship between the polygon geometry and the NURBS curve. They're literally connected to each other utilizing history. So what I can do is literally move the control vertex and it will change the shape of the geometry, and you can kind of use it to sculpt it a little bit. So you can kind of change and morph the shape that you're working with because they are connected to each other by history. And then that allows you to change the shape. Now, one thing that I do recommend you do not do is make adjustments to the end of the NURBS curve, that line, because it totally disrupts the geometry. So you don't want to use one end or the other. But if you go to the CVs or the vertices, or the CVs in the middle, those you can make changes to the shape with very safely. And again, if you're making like a handle or a spout or something that has a particularly smooth curve to it, this might be a very handy tool for you to make that. And again, none of these tools are like earth-shattering. None of them are going to completely change your modeling workflow. You're still going to build 90 to 95 or more % of your shape and form using extrude, multicut, insert edge loop. That's where it's all going to come from. But every once in a while, these fun little tools can help you out of a tight spot. Does that make sense? So none of these are earth-shattering, but there's some fun little things that they can do. So just a couple of added accessories for your tool belt. Yes? Okay, well, again, the important thing here is when you're running the bridge tool is make sure you've got it set for smooth path plus curve when you run the tool. So you got to have that option turned on because that means it's going to make the curve for you. And then when you make the curve, again, you got to make sure you grab the curve. And the curve is in there, just sometimes you can't see it because it's hidden. If you don't hide your polygons, you know, if you're looking at this and I go to wireframe mode, you know, you can't even really see the NURBS curve. But if you go in there, it is in there. You can see it. It's just not easy to see. And when you select it, you notice that the geometry lights up purple. And that's an indication of it's sort of a hierarchy related thing. This curve has influence over this geometry. Therefore, when I select one, the other lights up just to show that association. So that curve is in there if you set that option. But again, it's just kind of a cool little thing that you can have it do. Again, nothing that's going to rewrite the way you build, but a fun little thing to do if you need it here and there. With some trickier shapes, because every once in a while you come across something that's kind of challenging. So just another option that you can throw out there. Any questions on the bridge tool? How are we doing with that? We doing okay? Now, let me walk around. I'll check and see. Just make sure everybody's able to move that thing around and make some shape changes to it. And again, remember, you got to combine the geometry first. It doesn't work. Oh, good. Doesn't it? But yeah, the key is make sure you've combined it first, because if you haven't combined it, you got to combine both. Select both and mesh combine. You don't have to delete the faces. With the bridge tool, this is the one that you don't have to delete the faces on the inside. Yeah, the other ones you do. You're right. The other ones you do. But in this one, it will actually wipe them out for you, thankfully. There you go. Yeah, just grab the faces at the end of each one. Yep. You can just grab all those faces there and all those faces there. Well, you have to combine them first. Select both. Mesh combine. Yeah, hold shift. There you go. Mesh combine. Then grab the faces at the end of one and the faces at the end of the other. There you go. Looks like you got it working. How you guys doing? Okay? Gesundheit. It should look okay.
Yeah, I just look exaggerated.
Oh, okay. Very cool. All right. Yes, twist I don't use. I got to be honest with you. It's just fun to look at. I like, well, actually, I just like watching it twist and untwist. But yeah, I typically don't use that. I suppose if I was modeling a drill bit, maybe.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, that might be just about it. Otherwise, yeah, not really going to happen unless I'm modeling an MC Escher painting.
If you're modeling one of those crazy Mario Kart 8 racetracks at the race.
Yes. No, that's true. Yep. Well, just make sure you got a fast car. You can dodge everybody. That's what I do. High speed, not good great steering. I find that helps a lot. All right, how we doing, my digital friends? You guys all right?
Yeah, that's some good questions. Whether it's a different size,
Yep.
do the same object and the same number of edges.
Exactly. As long as it's got the same number of edges, you're not going to have any trouble. Where you get into trouble is if you've got different numbers of edges, if you haven't combined it first, that's when things start to not happen. So different sizes we saw an example of here. And again, you know, more curved, we can do that as well. So it's pretty fun. There's a lot of fun things that happen. But like I said, these are not tools that are going to change the way you model. They just add a little bit, sort of a special sauce you can put on your sandwich. Still have to have a great sandwich, but special sauce does make it nice. All righty. So actually that brings us to our skill check for today's lecture. I would like for you guys to create a snowman or snow woman. And for this particular assignment, you can do anything you want. It is wide open, so you can be as creative as you wish. And I encourage you to be as creative as you possibly can, because this is pretty fun. Usually there's not that much freedom on these sorts of things. But what I want you to do is build a snowman or a snow woman, and you have to use either, and that means not all of them, either the bridge tool, Booleans operations, or, yeah, actually we'll just go with bridge tool and Booleans operation. I want you to use one of those two, or both if you want. So try to make a really cool snow person using that. And let me show you, I have some, I think I have some pretty cool examples in here to show you guys. Here is, okay, here's my example Booleans Frosty. And again, what I'm looking for is I want to see that the edges match up nicely between the different shapes. So you will notice though that his face is obviously not combined with his body. That's okay. I just want to see the primary shapes attaching really nicely to each other at the same number of edges, nice smooth attachment, good quality with regard to that. In terms of the design, again, it's wide open. You guys can make whatever you want. This is a really cool one we got one time. I like that guy a lot. He likes warm hugs. That's a pretty good one. And it's summer. Also, also we got this one,
Oh, man.
which is,
Appreciate that.
I can definitely appreciate that one, yeah.
isn't that cool? Yeah, I like that one. This one's a,
Reference you got.
this is another pretty neat one here. So feel free to have fun. Again, just make sure you're using a Booleans operation, doesn't matter to me which one, or use the bridge tool to create these things. So again, the design is wide open, so have fun with that. But I just want to see that you can use these two tools with some ability. Are there any questions about the skill check? Any questions at all? No? How about my digital friends? Are you guys good? Okay, looks like they're good to go. All right, we shall see. So make some cool snowmen or snow women because I would love to see them. All right, now I want to go back to talking a little bit about tonight's turn-in. I want to make sure you guys are all utilizing your self-grade document. And again, this is your week 2 turn-in. So we're asking for more things. You know, we went over this last class, but I want to remind you, some things are the same. Form and silhouette, that doesn't change. Things made in pieces, that doesn't change. Good edge looping and topology doesn't change. Transformations frozen, history deleted. Who can tell me where transformations frozen? Where is that? How do I do that? What are the steps?
You go to modify and then it's freeze transformation.
Modify and then freeze transformations. How about deleting the history? Who can tell me that one?
You go to edit,
Uh-huh.
delete by type. First you select your object.
Yes.
You go to edit, delete by type, and then delete history.
That's correct. Edit, delete by type history.
Or, I think you can go over this.
Alt D.
Yes.
Your shortcut.
Yeah.
Always use your shortcut.
There's shortcuts everywhere, and yeah, I encourage you guys to use them. Go ahead.
Speaking of shortcuts, what is caps lock? Because like whenever I accidentally press it, it immediately puts up a message.
Yes, it completely freaks out Maya because caps lock changes all of your keys to capitals, so then all of your shortcuts will not work. So I can't tell you how many times people were frustrated because they didn't realize that caps lock was on, and in previous versions of Maya it didn't tell you, and you're like, why are my hotkeys not working? They get really frustrated.
Well, I know back in 2016 it told you.
Yes, well, previous versions it didn't, and I have to be honest with you, a couple of years ago, not all that long ago, but a couple of years ago, you guys didn't have laptops. Students had to come to school to work on their assignments, and we had labs with computers in them. And every lab you went into, the students had pried the caps lock button right off the keyboard because they were so mad because they kept hitting that and not realizing that somebody had hit it, and it was driving them crazy. So they pried the caps lock key off of every keyboard. It was ridiculous. But yeah, it's just a source of frustration. So I guess recent versions of Maya are letting you know, hey, caps lock is on. It's not Maya. Save the hate mail. It's not us.
Still getting hate mail.
Yeah, no, they're still gonna get hate mail. They're trying to cut it down. But yeah, that's what that's all about. Things don't work right when the caps lock is on. It's a good question though. All right, let's see. Layers, we've talked about those. Asset named. Honestly, I'm not sure how so many of you guys miss naming the asset because that's such an easy thing to do. So for example, if you grab a piece of geometry, it shouldn't say P-sphere 3. What that should say is head. And it's so easy to fix. All you have to do is, or if it's the whole body, in this instance, the whole thing lights up. You just click in that field at the top in your channel box and snowman, hit enter. Now it's named, it's good. So, don't forget to do that. It is so easy, but so important. And I know some of you guys, you like to paste, cut and copy and paste your geometry, which just makes me cringe. But, make sure you've got a name up there other than the default name. And if it says Snowman, Albuquerque, Foxtrot, Omaha, 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 and at the very end it says P cube 19, that's still got its default name in there, so that's not going to count. Make sure that the name in the top here is utterly devoid of default name. I only want to see whatever that piece is. Does that make sense? So be extra cautious, again, if you're doing that paste thing. But yeah, make sure you're doing that. So make sure you're naming, because again, it's worth almost a whole letter grade. Don't lose a letter grade over something silly. Lose it over something hard. Make sure that you're in presentation mode. Again, wireframe with your scene centered. Name your files right. Again, we give you the name at the end of each activity. You really can't miss with that. So make sure not only is the folder the correct name, The Maya file has to be the correct name, and it's the same name, so make sure you name them both. Because you really don't want to miss those points. They're way too easy. Don't miss them. You'll be sad. So get those points. Those are the easy ones. You know, if you're going to lose points, have it be over something tricky, challenging, you know. And the reason I say this is because next week, no wait, not even next week, this week, next class, we start talking about UV mapping. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with UV mapping or have any experience with it. UV, yeah, I see it's a couple of hands going up very slowly with some cringing. UV mapping is an extremely challenging topic. Of the things that I teach you how to do, it is by far the hardest, by far. So what I would say is it's really hard to do well at UV mapping, especially your first time. Do really well on this other stuff, get the easy points. You know what I mean? You're going to struggle with UV mapping. You're not probably going to get the grade you wanted in UV mapping. It's not easy. I do my best to make it easy for you, but it is hard. It is challenging, and it is very different, and that's what makes it difficult, is because it is very different. There are not many people who teach UV mapping on a basic level, and I know why. It's frustrating to teach, it's frustrating to learn, but if you come in with your A game, you bring your best attitude, take great notes, and listen carefully, you're going to do great. You know, and if you're in my digital class and you can't make it to the live one, take notes while you're watching the videos. It really makes a huge difference in terms of your retention, and then being able to jump to where you need to be when you're looking for information on video if you have to find it. Scrubbing forever is such a frustrating use of your time. But as I said, we get into UV mapping, I think Thursday. Isn't it Thursday, Brian?
Yes.
Number 8. So we're going to be getting into UV mapping next, and this stuff will push you. It will push your limits. So again, take notes, pay extra close attention. If you've never taken notes in your life, take notes for lecture 8 and 9, because this is not easy stuff. And again, what you know about modeling, not necessarily going to help you with UV mapping at all. So you really got to bring your A game. Like this is a brand new class. We're doing another language. So are there any questions about your skill check? We're doing the snowman or snow woman. Use Booleans or bridge tools in order to achieve this character. Yep. You can do however many you want. It's entirely up to you. But what I would say is make sure you've got your turn in done first and then work on this. Does that make sense? Because the snowman is fun, but your week 2 turn in is due this evening. Oh, did you? Okay. Because that's a big ticket item. You really need to do well on that. It's worth a lot of points. And like I said, UV mapping is very challenging. Most people don't do particularly well on that their first try. So, you know, get these easier points to insulate yourself against not doing as well at that. And if you do well at that, bonus, you're just going to kill it then grade-wise, if that makes sense. As opposed to assuming that everything's going to be sort of the same level. It's not. Never is. Is that cool? Well, actually, I didn't do this cape. One of your fellow students did, but this is just a piece of geometry. You know, they had a geometry plane and they extruded the faces they need and moved the vertices to make it look like it's kind of flowing. But that's just a single geometry plane manipulated in such a way.
Would you say that geometry sound, you say it's mathematical sound?
Yes.
Because I see a lot of funky looking shapes.
Well, I tell you, there are some bends, like if you look right here, I see a change in shape that's not supported by an edge, so that's not ideal. And if this was something that I had built, I would probably have used my multi-cut tool. And if I really needed that shape to look like that, I would have cut that like that so that there was an edge there. Does that make sense? And, you know, there's a couple of places that are not ideal, but the most part, it's not bad. But yeah, one of those things you always have to ask yourself is there a better way to create this edge flow? You know, is there a way that I can quad this out to where I'm getting better edge flow and having fewer issues in terms of the shape change? And how can I accomplish the same thing without having, you know, as bad in terms of my edge flow? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you can go back at it after you've created the changes in shape and then try to figure out and then say, you know what, that's probably not so good. This would be better if I connected this like this and then got rid of that shape, and now that's four-sided. Maybe this vertex needs to come up a little or go down a little bit just to maintain the fact that it's more or less planar with the other edges or with the other vertices. Does that make sense? You kind of have to go back and work it. It's a good question, though. And you can see there's a ton of history on this thing. Got to clean that up. All right. Any other questions? Those are good questions. I'm very happy to see that. No? Okie dokie. Cool. All right, then. Well, let's just make sure we are good to go. You guys are ready for your week 2 turn in. And again, if you need some help, don't be afraid to ask for some help in lab. My personal recommendation is show the instructors in lab, say, hey, I'm thinking of turning this in. Did I forget anything? They'll tell you, yeah, hey, don't forget to do this. Oh, you're missing that. You know, that could be a whole letter grade or 2 just with some helpful feedback. And if you're in my digital class, you know, get to that Google Hangout. Ask some people there. Ask the instructors there. That's what they're there for. They can help you out. Get that feedback and do well. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. That's all I wanted to talk about today. We will get back together again on Thursday. Like I said, we're going to get into UV mapping. So hopefully you will bring your A game on Thursday because it's a little bit bumpy. So put on your seatbelts. Thank you, everybody. Yes, a little turbulence.